Okay, so yeah, no, I definitely saw. I didn't see the video itself, but I saw that Jay Wong was doing some indie stuff, and that he played some Murphite, right? So that was one of my first questions, where I'm like, okay, is he doing an explicit like I'm showcasing indies thing? Is that something that he's like actually said that he's doing, or is this just kind of people being like, he is covering some indie games, therefore it is him showcasing, right? I just because I do think there's a difference between those two things. If it's an explicit, this is what I am, like this is the kind of showcase that I'm doing, the show that I'm doing, then it seems really weird not to be like, to touch base with the developer to say, hey man, like I'm doing this new series, I want to kick it off with this, maybe bring in your fans, like friends and stuff like that in community. Yeah, so he's just playing stuff, right? Which makes more sense why he didn't make that kind of explicit contact. Didn't tell you, didn't link you, didn't give you a shout out, used you for content. Well, I get a little conflicted sometimes about that, where I'm like, look, we all use each other for content. I am currently using Sega and Virtua Fighter for content. That's how that works, right? Like, I do not have the copyrights to restream these games. That is a matter of fact, right? It's stupid. It's a bad law. Copyright is broken in so many ways, right? It's not like I'm doing a bad thing, but it makes me, I think about it every now and again, where I'm like, there is, to some extent, we all use each other for content, right? But you'll notice that there are some creators and some artists and some streamers out there who, when they do this, it will leave a bad taste in people's mouth. My hope is that I'm never doing that, right? Like, I'm always trying to work with the developers, right? It's like understanding that it's a symbiotic relationship, not a parasitic one, right? And I think that's the distinction, is that you have to make sure that the thing that you are doing is not parasitic in nature and is symbiotic in nature. And you're right, Grav. Maybe he did. But my point being that what is right and what is good and what is legal are all kind of distinct things, right? The biggest example that I always get, stream pirates, right? So you have a whole community and ecosystem of poachers who have grown up around reposting matches from tournaments before the tournament organizers can get to them. And I'm not saying that those guys, those like reposters, are in the right. I just find it kind of funny and perhaps a little ironic that the streamers who are without the rights to the games that they're streaming then complain about people reposting and redistributing and republishing their streams, which someone does not have the right to have, right? Once again, I'm not saying that the streaming ecosystem is bad and that we should have to get that legal written permission, right? I'm just saying, I find it very interesting, and this is something that makes me self-reflect on the work that I do and how I engage with other creators when I'm using them in some fashion to do the thing that I do. And like I said, I go to great lengths to make sure that when I'm doing something, it's not at the expense of the person whose art I'm working with. That is never my intent, right? And I go to great lengths to avoid that. I think it's important when these things come up, because you're right. I agree with you, Butler, that it is always disheartening when I see a Matt McMuscle's worst fighting game ever video, where I understand it's a bit, right? I think the bit does harm to the communities who are out there who represent these games that are now apparently the worst of the worst, right? I don't like, that's not good. That's not helpful, right? So yeah, when something pops off in a community and a streamer or a creator then says, hey, let me try to capitalize on this, and they end up using someone else's thing to get something, over on someone at their expense, that becomes problematic. That is the parasitic relationship, right? You don't think that they need to run doing a video game on a game in genre that they cover by the devs? No. I don't, right? It's like I don't run by every time when I play a game on stream, run it by the devs. I try to. I'm usually in contact with. It's easier for me because I actively float in these circles, whereas someone like Jay Wong actively floats in the wider fighting game community and probably has, no word of a lie, like 50, 100 developers reaching out to them to be like, play my game on stream. Please play my game on stream. My God, play my game on stream. So, like, I get that Jay Wong doesn't run in those circles, so might not be inclined to say, hey, let me drop them a DM to be like, guy, I'm playing your game today. Once again, it's not about the requirement. I'm reticent to talk about this stuff sometimes. Here, let me go. I'm a little reticent to talk about these things sometimes because I fear that when I say things like, we don't actually have the rights to stream these games, people hear me say, it is a good thing. Right? That is not what I'm actually saying. But it is important to use these things as an opportunity to think about what we do and how we do it and how it impacts others, right? And I think this is it. Largely, people don't do that, right? You don't think about how it's impacting and how you utilizing the existence of something that someone else created impacts them, right? It's like, yeah, is there a requirement that we care about each other in that way? No. Would it be good? Right? Is that my hope? Yes. We shouldn't treat Jay Wong like he was doing a favor to the games, even if it does indirectly help, but I don't think he was wrong to do a video on them from his own fighting game stuff. No. Very well said. That you're right. He's not doing them a favor, right? But he is not able to get a video go viral that says, wild indie game with fish people, right? He doesn't get to say that if someone didn't make that game, right? And so it just, once again, it seems to me in a symbiotic relationship, you would want to keep the whole ecosystem happy, right? And you take steps towards making sure that it doesn't crumble, because if people stop wanting you to cover their games, like, this is it. And when I started with, we don't have the right to stream these games, the other side of that is like someone like Matrified or whatever indie dev, Mutrex, right, Andrea Demetrio, they all have the rights to cease and desist a Jay Wong, right? That is how that works, right? Capcom can come knocking on my door and tell me not to play Street Fighter and host a tournament for it, and these indie devs can go knocking on other streamers' doors and say, you don't actually have a right to do this. What happens when the balance gets upset to the point where a developer feels like they are having more harm done to them by someone covering their game than good? You get that, right? And that's a problem for the whole ecosystem and everyone who's playing in it. So Butler saying, yo, you reached out to Matt McMuscles for the SFTM video and you were like, hey, we're trying to make this a thing. And he linked to the Frog Crew Discord in the video, right, in the video description. I respect that. Very cool of him. Absolutely. That is something that, like, and in fair, like, I've had a couple back and forths with Matt McMuscles about that kind of stuff where I'm like, look, I don't vibe with the worst fighting game ever thing. And he was like, look, man, it's a bit, it's like, it's a format. It's an excuse to look at these things. I think we all understand that these games are not, they're not the ones that are regularly held in such high regard, even if there's value in them. So that's why he does it that way. Once again, I don't agree with it, but I understand it, right? But I think stuff like that, recognizing when, oh, I have done a disservice to this community because of the way I have created my thing, that, okay, there are steps you can take to rectify that. And it's good that we're able to acknowledge, very cool of him to do that. Very, like, oh, no, there are people here who care about these things. You can care about them too, and there's a whole community for it. And then, yeah, the trying to move the bad coverage just makes it spread even further, right? This is, whatever, the Streisand effect. You're going to get blowback when you react poorly to a reasonable reaction because you were careless in your delivery of something, right? And like, this is the other thing where I'm like, I don't want to ascribe like malicious intent to anybody who has done these kinds of things. I am sure I have been guilty. I can think of it off the top of my head. I made a video. I mentioned Koihime Enbu, right? And I was like, I made a gag about what's an Enbu. Oh my God, dear God, no, my eyes, right? Like, I made that thing. That joke, well, I personally think it's kind of funny. also does a disservice to the community of a game that is actually really interesting, right? Like, it's not like it's just fan service fanfare, though there is a lot of it, and not fantastic at times. But like, there's value in these games. There's community around them. Is it my place to make a gag about fan service? No, I can have a conversation about fan service and how it hurts, right? But like, right? Like, I know I've done it before. It's carelessness a lot of the time. It's not malicious intent, right? But recognizing that, thinking about it, take a moment and say, okay, why did I get there? Maybe this thing that this other person is doing should not just be used so I can make a joke at their expense and have a good reaction on Twitter, right? Or fucking Blue Sky. Like, that's not great. Oh, Grav, yeah, it feels like it's a lose-lose for developers who to like respond to any feedback for their game these days, right? Someone comes to me and say my game controls like shit, and movement feels horrible, and I'm just like, well, you don't understand that there's a whole like momentum-based boost dash system that you could do by charging a move and doing X, Y, and Z. As interesting as that might be, right? Like, reacting poorly and aggressively to someone who has a criticism, even if it's not a reasonable criticism, even if they're dicks about it, creates this vicious feedback loop, right? So yeah, you do run the risk of angering the hordes and then them coming down on you with even more disingenuous criticism. It's tough, right? Because it's not to say that you should let people get away with unjust criticism, right? But it's a weird thing where, like, and I've seen developers get into a situation where they recognize this, so they don't do it. But they have a trusted and very, very dedicated community and a couple of big boosters who are willing to go out and do it for them. And that creates a whole other weird dynamic of people calling you shills, right? Because now you're saying the thing that the defensive developer would say or the defensive artist would say, but you're doing it from like one step removed. And it's like, you can almost see the cover being granted, right? And so, yeah, it's bad. It's bad news bears, man. Yeah, rights and what's right aren't always the same. Thank you, Mohas. I really appreciate that. Nuance is important. I would like, less discourse, more discussion. And you can't get into the real discussion if you're not willing to tackle some of the nuance, right? Unfortunately, yeah, it does mean that oftentimes when I say these things, like, I've had people come down on me real hard for what I think are some fairly milquetoast takes, right? But people are so wrapped up in their own very, very visceral, like, reaction to these things, right? And so, yeah, like, I'm going to have a visceral reaction to defending my community or to a corporation coming into my grassroots community and trying to exert their will or exert their influence, right? I'm going to have a reaction to that, of course, right? But, and this is, how many times have I said but in this conversation, right? Because there's another side to this. There's another component that it's really easy and it's really satisfying to ignore that component and go with your visceral reaction, right? It's much more challenging to look at that other side and say, okay, how does it actually interact? I was talking to this with a friend the other day, where the fighting game community has a notoriously anti-corporate, anti-esports bent to them, right? For good reason. If you look at some of the corporate influences that tried to make their way into the fighting game community over the years, you will see some not great and not, like, productive examples, right? I think people looked at MLG as one of the big ones, as MLG and Evo partnership being straying so far or far enough from what fighting game players were after for that Evo that it kind of skewed everything. And the fighting game community's reaction to that was to say, fuck esports, right? It wasn't to say MLG as a corporation doesn't understand us, maybe someone else does. It was to say, corporations don't understand us. We are better off without them. And that has changed, for better or worse, the course of the fighting game community over the last 20 years, right? So when we see modern day resistance to big corporate structures and esports putting their thumb and engaging and like activating their influence within the community, you see this backlash, right? And now that Evo, and this is bringing it up, Evo season, guys. Now that Evo is the kind of organization that is that big, is that large. They are themselves that large corporate esports interest now. It's no longer the grassroots, the largest grassroots tournament that we all defend. It is slowly becoming the corporate structure that the, you know, anti-esports fighting game community likes to rally against, which I think is fascinating. And all of that should, like, depending on how you feel about all of that, I think will reveal a lot about like what you're taking away and maybe where, I don't know, there are some gaps in our own, like, you know, our own assessment. Shit, we've no singled again. Yo, if you are even remotely interested in anything that I just said, first of all, thank you. I'm glad you're here. And you can check out, I have a whole ass video about values and the fighting game community and what we value and how we create, you know, how we manage, assess, and exert our values in our community and how it affects us. You should go check that out. It's over there on the YouTube. Did I do that right? Hey, I did do it right. And you know what? We can also chat about it in the Discord, friends, because I have a Discord. Yo, let me just say thank you, everyone, for joining me here today in the Digital Basement. We're going to call it for a day. We've had some lovely time with 2D Virtua Fighter. We had a lovely little chat. I appreciate y'all coming through.